this book came out when, conflict in Israel and Palestine became so gigantic. Here's my book on love. Like it was really a tough time. And I remember as I was on the tour, because I was like, I wanted to be really responsible with how I gathered people and made them feel like every place was safe for however they felt about anything that they were going through or feeling. When a war is breaking out in the world, you feel that like your little life of your little book feels like, how could I try to talk about myself or something I made?
Yeah. Cleo Wade, everybody. She just released her second picture book, and it's called May You Love and Be Loved, Wishes for Your Life. She's a New York Times bestselling author and poet.
Most people don't know that most of what I write are things I practically use for myself.
Yes.
Like I've used the mantra, like if you see the words like, if you're grateful for where you are, respect the road that got you there, like trust and believe, I say that to myself every single morning, or if I ever have a moment of shame.
I am terrified to look back at my own words.
Yeah.
We change every day.
And I always write books that I feel would be helpful to me given like the pace of my life or the pace of the world or what I feel like I have time for or don't.
Aging is such a gift when you are reading because you're able to look at it in a completely different way.
Writing is isolating no matter what. I love alone time and I do things so differently. I mean, you remember like my apartment in New York was like every wall was a different like, kind of weird moody color and I had like dark red curtains.
It's just like every day. Yeah, this is just every day for us. It is kind of, because it is our morning. It's our morning phone call.
Something some people may not know about Nicole and I is that we call each other. We are not, I actually am a phone person. I think I call, but you do not like to talk on the phone, but we talk on the phone pretty much every morning between our kids' things.
Yep, right after school drop off, we jump on the phone and we just talk about everything from life to kids to what books we're reading to, it can, I mean, when you're in writing mode, just like talking about that. And we just talk about life and books, which do blend all the time.
I think also something we do is, okay, what some people, all right, I have this theory about something that would be called gossip, because I think that you can talk about something that happened but you zoom out to the why of how this happens in our human experience.
Yes.
So sometimes I'll call Nicole and be like, I'm not calling to talk about this person or thing or whatever, but I'm trying to get to the bottom of why does it rub me the wrong way in a greater experience of how we live in community or in the world. Why is this how does this happen, or how do two people end up so perceiving something so differently or experiencing something so differently?
Yeah.
And, one of the things I think, I feel like, I know I've been thinking about a lot lately, but I feel like I know we've talked about it and there were some prepared questions here. And one of them had to do with resilience specific to the Black experience. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking about that a lot lately because I have been kind of obsessed with the ways in which Black community orients towards freedom. And if you are a people who have constantly on the other side of freedom or away from freedom, and you want it, there's so much resilience in that, right? So yes. There's, I need a good book on my way to freedom. I need a good song on my way to freedom, because in that hopeful journey that I know and feel belongs to me, that I know I feel ancestors fought for me, therein lies resilience. Mm-hmm. And I often think about how Black resilience especially is so joyful.
Yes.
And even when it's the hard stuff, you even feel like when you read Baldwin and he's talking about some of the really hard things, it's like you feel joy that he was able to sit in France and write it.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Like, I like that life for you. I'm so happy for you, even in the torment, the struggle, writing some of the, things in these books that our kids will use as advice for how to orient towards freedom, which is kind of crazy. But
it is. I read Giovanni's Room for the first time this year. Did I tell you that?
No.
That I read it for the first time in October. And it is the most heartbreaking and beautiful at the same time, simultaneously, book that I've ever read in my life. And I have read many stories that revolve around the queer community. And that to me was just, I don't know. I mean, the only way that I can really describe it is just so heartbreaking and beautiful. Like that being the French setting, just being so, really feeling isolation and love simultaneously is I really, really think it's something that's what separates Baldwin from every other. It's like why it's one of the most beautiful books ever.
You know, it's really crazy that reading for the first time, books you either thought you read or you can't believe you didn't read, or reading books for what feel like the first time because you probably read them. Like when I was pregnant with Bayou, was I pregnant with Bayou? No, I reread Beloved for the first time in, I don't know, since I think I read it right after high school or something. Yeah. And I mean, I had already had another kid. I'd had kids by then and was pregnant. And I was like, well, I mean, in like odd book to read while you're pregnant. Because
yes.
like, excuse me, are you
dark,
okay?
Yeah.
It was a dark time.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't. It was dim.
Mood lighting. It was a mood lighting time.
Yeah, it was. And
yeah, go ahead.
And I was like, God, when the very cool and sometimes sad and sometimes odd thing about getting older is you're further and further from girlhood and this kind of girlhood processing or boyhood or, childhood processing of these ideas about life and the world, and you're able to look at them with far more complexity or deeper empathy or a deeper compassion or a deeper attachment to children because you have them or whatever it is. And I'm always kind of shook by how, I truly felt that I was reading that book for the first time as if I remember reading it and being like, God, I wish I could, write like Toni Morrison. I just remember thinking that the writing was so beautiful, and it's so hard to read Toni Morrison because I think she speaks in her own language and you kind of have to drop in. Like, to me, if you open a Toni book, it's like snails for the first probably 30 minutes, then you drop in and then all of a sudden you're cruising through the book. Like it takes me so long to all of a sudden be like, the pace of the world, the pace that Toni Morrison demands you be at to understand what she's saying and feel her language.
Yeah.
And so that was its own crazy thing because maybe it was COVID. I can't remember. I think so when I was reading it, but it's like to drop in like that when in a frenzied world, it was so meditative and beautiful and helpful. And I actually just couldn't believe the different feeling experience I had from the first time I read it. It's almost like when you're speed reading when you're young, it's like you're noticing technique and you're noticing da-da-da and you're like, oh, that was awesome, or that made me think this, and you're all in your head. And then I think as you leave girlhood, you read and you're really deeply in your heart because life feels more fragile. More horrible things start happening around you, that reminds you of the fragility of our lives. And so many of people that you are your favorite authors because you just were so admired them, they really become really close and intimate to you. And it's that's to me it's weird, I think, for a book to confront you with your own distance from being a child.
Well, I think that's one of the most beautiful parts of reading. And I am a very big believer in rereading books because, you always bring so much of yourself to whatever you're reading. And so exactly like you're saying, reading Toni Morrison in high school when you are cued to understand technique and style and, something that becomes something of a task. Is a completely different reading experience than when you're actually choosing to involve and immerse yourself into a story. And when you are reading, age is a real gift. Aging is such a gift when you are reading, because you're able to look at it in a completely different way, and like, of course, reading a book when you're in high school and these things, you're like, I can't even comprehend what this loss is, what this struggle is.
Or like the dates that it has to be read by this date. And it's like, I think a lot of those containers do not create connection for you in the book.
Yeah.
To know, or I get why they kind
could you even be looking for yourself in it, period. It's more of just a task or a, some sort of requirement.
Or you get why in the summer times they'd be like, okay, you're going to have a reading contest and who can read the most books. And all of a sudden you realize that you kind of like, I would speed through some of the best books ever written.
Yeah.
And then later you're kind of like, wait, what?
Well, it's very, I've never been someone who can read in a group. I don't belong to any book club. I'm not someone that
I feel like you've tried to book club.
I have tried at the request of other people. They're like, let's read this together. But reading is so personal and private to me that I wouldn't even know what to say to someone. Like, if I'm reading a story, I'm reading it and I'm taking it in at that time, and then it's marinating in me. I mean, I've had books be so powerful that I literally the next day I'm like, I'm jet lagged. I'm jet lagged from traveling, and I need to take it down. I have to just let it, be in there. And I'm just like, it is not my strength at all, which I don't think is a bad thing. For me, stories are very personal. I'm taking it in and it's all, it's really about where you are right now, and those parts that are hitting you and sticking with you, and like, understanding a Giovanni's Room level heartbreak at 42 is very different than something that I could ever understand at 16, 17.
Yeah. Will you just put a book down? Like, if you don't like it, will you just say bye? Or do you feel you have to finish it?
I don't feel you have to finish it. I don't. There's so much great literature out there that I just think you can just keep it moving. And I don't even count it as not reading something. Obviously, if you're 10 pages in and you decide to move on, then that's one thing. But if you're 100 pages in and you're not connecting with the story, that's fine. I also think that it can just not be the right time.
Yeah.
And you can come back to it later. Books really surprise you. One of my favorite books is Homegoing and I wasn't expecting it. And that was like in the summer, reading that level of, I think it's 8 generations long story.
Yeah.
In the summertime, like while I'm sitting on a beach, was something that I was not expecting at all, but it just grabbed me.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's exactly
it's not a beach read. No, it is not. It is not. But it grabbed me. It took me. I had, and like, again, that's the power of books. That's the power of stories, is that you find them, but then they also find you.
Do you think that I want to talk a little bit about growth mindset, because something I really love about you and I aspire towards is you're really intentional. And do you think that finding your way towards being so intentional, where you're like, I will do this with this person, I will, I will only do this with this person, I only feel comfortable, like, you're very, it's intentional, it's specific. But I think in that there's a way that you're kind of like watering yourself for growth. Mm-hmm. Do you associate being intentional with your own kind of growth, or is it a way to kind of protect you where you are?
Well, I think that part of the reason why I am so clear about what I want to do is because I feel like I spent my 20s doing everything and saying yes to everything. And, there is a very clear feeling in my body when I know that I'm not doing something that is aligned with who I want to be and the person that I want to be, and my I would say goals for myself, but I don't it's not like I'm not the person that wakes up and is like, these are my goals. I don't have them written down on a piece of paper, but I can feel it.
Yeah.
I know when something is not aligned with who I am. And I start my day out reading, and it really, I think, sets the tone for me to be in my body. Even though reading novels really is something that I enjoy so much because it takes me out of my life. I like to leave. I like to leave town. I like to be immersed in someone else's story, and leaving and also simultaneously really connecting to myself. So, and that really sets the tone for everything else that I do within my day and my free time. And I can feel it. I can feel when I'm leaving my body. I can feel when a choice that I'm asked to make is just not something that's for me. And, so it makes it very easy for me to say, yes, I actually want to do this, or no, I don't. Or I want to curate this time. I think I think it's such a big part of your and my friendship is we're like, what would be so fun? And we just curate. We just curate our own time of this is going to feel good for us. This is going to connect us to who we want to be as readers, who we want to be as people. That's how we landed here doing this.
True.
A
few years ago, someone said to me that the opposite of self-care is self-betrayal.
Yeah.
And I remembered in that being like, oh, I get it. I actually understand the pathway to growth, and because I do know that only things that are cared for grow. I do know that that plant can't grow unless you give it the care of sunlight and water. I do know that. And I do know that we are more similar to a plant growing than a phone that's ringing.
Yes.
So I always kind of think about, how do you access care? But care feels so abstract, obviously. And so when I started to get that you could just, as long as you knew you were going away from self-betrayal, then you were going towards care, I realized that I was like, oh, if you're really intentional, and almost in a cutthroat way, because you know me, I'm very
You love a snip. Yes,
I snip.
You do. You love a snip. So do I.
Virgos. We do. We will cut.
And going back to what we were first talking about when you were talking about gossip and the difference in gossip and working something out. The reason why you and I have those great morning phone conversations are because, listen, we're talking about being intentional and doing things, walking away from things that don't serve us. But it's not like that doesn't happen, It's not like we don't find ourselves in those scenarios.
Yeah.
So being able to find someone that does know you in a way that you just maybe has picked up on something. I think you are someone that can actually just remember something that I've probably said in passing that I don't even remember about myself. And so if I'm in a scenario or I'm with people or any sort of situation and I call you the next morning and I'm like, I need to work something out. I was here and it really didn't make me feel good. And why didn't that happen? And, or why did that happen? This happened and, I was feeling this way and, I'm not sure. Having someone who knows you and knows the person that you want to be, being able to tell you as an outsider, let me tell you why this didn't work out for you. You put yourself in a scenario that was not serving you. Yeah. And I can tell you that as an outsider, I think sometimes you're too in it. And so working out things with somebody in a safe space who knows you and knows the person and the life that you want to live is so important.
Well, also what few people will tell you is that you often get hijacked out of doing what's right for yourself.
Yeah.
It's an opportunity comes, you think you should want to do this. There's some, small part of your insecurities that just gets, shot up into this room or into this space or around these people, or some nostalgia that makes you want to do. I mean, there's a million different ways that land you in a space where all of a sudden the person that you are who's done all this work on themselves or is trying to be intentional or is like, wait, hold on, what the hell am I doing here?
Yeah.
And I think that's when having a friend who can hold you accountable is so helpful, because they can be like, no, actually the last time you went there, you said this about the same exact group of, people, thing, whatever. And, how many times do you need to keep going there to realize that it makes you uncomfortable or it's not right for you? Or one of the best pieces of advice you ever gave me recently, I actually have two things I always quote you on, but this one's newer, is
Oh God.
Are you scared?
Yeah.
You're like, you said your friends are allowed to get on your nerves. Because what happens is sometimes you're so annoyed with something that happened, and the person is like, and it's not even maybe the person, but with your own stuff, you're so annoyed. And we tend to want to raise the stakes all the time to be like, they're good or they're bad or this was wrong or this was right. And there's so much injustice collecting in that. And then all of a sudden, if you're collecting injustice, you think you're God. Yeah. That's just, there's no other way around it. And so all of a sudden you're God because everyone's wrong or right or whatever. And so then all of a sudden when your high and mighty feelings about yourself start to melt, as they will always do, and you kind of come down to earth and realize you're not God and everyone's a person, you realize that, oh, they were on my nerves, and that's actually what rattled me up.
Yeah.
And
the role that you play in that.
Yes. And that was that kind of simple idea was so profound for me, because I was like, yes, you have to, like, even I remember saying that to Simon recently. For those of you who don't know Simon, he is my baby daddy. And I was like, he's saying something to me, and I was like, I don't want to talk. And he's just like, and then he's trying to make it something deeper. And I was like, it's actually not deep. You're just on my nerves. Yeah. And that was liberating, like, to say, because and it was relatable. Like, all of a sudden to him, he's like, oh, I got it. And then like a week later, it'd always be like, am I on your nerves right now? You're very Simon.
I'm very Simon.
Yes. And I was like, but it was such it was a care tool. Like, I was like, oh, like, acknowledging that you're on my nerves, you're not, but that doesn't mean that it's changing our relationship, or it's changing our this, or it's doing any of those things.
Yeah.
That was like kind of profound for me, because I think a lot of the times I'm like, this was on my nerves, and now I have all these decisions about what our relationship is or isn't, or how they do or don't fundamentally understand me or not, or whatever. And in that becomes kind of isolating.
Yeah. And
then you're kind of, someone's a villain and someone's a hero, and that dynamic's annoying.
The hero villain game is very real. It's an easy trap to fall into.
Yeah.
And going back to what you were saying about people always challenging you, Sister Outsider is also one of my favorite books of essays. And I don't remember which essay it was, but Audre Lorde said, and I will never forget it, that you will constantly, over and over, be challenged to leave yourself. And that's actually not a bad thing. That is a part of life, and it carves you even deeper into who you are as a person. And that is something that has stuck with me since I read it, because I stopped looking at it as a bad thing. Yeah. I stopped walking in the world and feeling taken down every time I felt someone didn't see me, or like I was being asked to do something that I didn't want to do, or maybe even fell in to being in a situation that wasn't serving me. Yeah. It ends up serving you, because you go even more into yourself, knowing that that is not right for you.
I remember doing a meditation one day, and the person talking was saying, and if you wandered, like, because obviously you're trying to meditate, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, the groceries, the laundry, and she's like, and if your mind has wandered away from presence, know that homecoming is always available. And that ended up being a huge theme in Remember Love, because and I think the first poem of that book is called Homecoming. And it was because in this more abstract way and really practical ways, the idea that you are always allowed to come home to yourself was such a relief.
Yes.
And come home to certain physical places. Like, I am from New Orleans, and I come home all the time. And this idea that even knowing that that's a part of care is that, oh, you know what, I actually need to touch the soil where I'm from to kind of re-intentionalize or reorient what I'm doing or where I'm going or whatever. And this idea that if I'm, you know, being high and mighty and judgy and whatever, that like there's something in me more beautiful that I can go home to.
Yeah.
Than like kind of living in the little like ugly balloons that float up.
And it's always there inside of you. You can always, you write a lot about that.
Yeah.
And I believe that in the first page of your book, your first essay is being lost.
Yeah.
And that was so powerful to me. Just understanding that, you'll say it better than I do, but that being lost is a good thing because then you're able to find yourself.
Well, and the pathway back to self is, you know, I mean, it might be laborious and it might be, you know, muddy and grueling, but it's shimmery. That is the kind of magical thing, is that if you can get back to yourself, that's where the aha that yourself is always there comes in. And there was this one part of Remember Love where, and it's weird because I'm not usually someone where I'm like, oh, I've got a favorite page of a book, but I did have this one favorite page of the book because as I was writing this book, this one thing kept coming to me, which was the voice of the guy in the old Motel 6 commercial where he'd be like, we'll leave the light on for you. And I was like, why do I keep thinking about this guy, this voice, I was seeing every commercial, because remember all the commercials were different and be like, we're in the car, da, 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 da. And then it'd be like the motels and the distance and the thing. And at the end, it was always like, you know, Motel 6, we'll leave the light on. And this idea that you are kind of, you know, this kind of safe way on a dark highway is your life. Like, is that you get on these roads and things are so dark and they seem so scary, and the light in the distance seems so faint. But believing that it's there because maybe there's some inner GPS or inner roadmap that said, I know that there's a Motel 6 that's just like 20 miles away, and like as you get closer, like I think I see it in the distance, but for a while you just have to believe it's there because, you know, the maps told you it was there.
Yeah.
And then to just say to yourself, we'll leave the light on for you, became like my greatest meditation for this book. Because, you know, as you remember, even when this book came out, when, you know, the kind of conflict in Israel and Palestine became so gigantic, and it was really a tough time to want to gather. And I mean, it came out within the week of October 7th. And I just remember being like, it's really hard when the world is so sad and it's so tough and it's so conflicting and violent and complicated and awful, that to be like, and here's my book on love. Like it was really a tough time. And I remember as I was on the tour, because I was like, I wanted to be really responsible with how I gathered people and made them feel like every place was safe for however they felt about anything that they were going through or feeling. But, you know, I remember at the time being like, oh my God, how am I going to do this? Like I was scared. I mean, you remember, I was like, this is not, when a war is breaking out in the world, you feel that like your little life of your little book feels like, how could I try to talk about myself or something I made? Yeah. And in that, you kind of forget that like art is what gets us through. And I did kind of like, in the moment, I was like, oh my God, this is so hard. And I remember even being so thankful that like after doing the couple of days of press, which I was like scared to do, because again, I was just like, how am I talking about this little book of poetry in the in the context of what goes on in our huge, crazy world? And I was so grateful that my kind of second tour stop or third tour stop was here with you. Yeah. And Diara, I remember one of our close friends like surprised me on the plane, and I cried because the tour was like, I want to cry now. The tour was so hard. Yes. And I remember I was like saying that like line. I was like, I would do that. I wrote that meditation. And I think that sometimes when you write, I think the types of things I write, I feel like most people don't know that most of what I write are things I practically use for myself.
Yes.
And so I'm like, oh no, if that mantra is in the book, like I've used the mantra, like if you see the words, like, if you're grateful for where you are, respect the road that got you there, like trust and believe. I say that to myself every single morning, or if I ever have a moment of shame about my past self, my past lives, my past decisions, my past thoughts, all the things that exist everywhere but the present moment.
Yeah.
I say that mantra to kind of like reground myself.
Yes.
And so when I was like, oh my God, this like, I've got to get up. I mean, I think I cried after every single night of my tour because the weight of what people were just going through. I mean, you remember like the people, the time we're going through in their own individual lives, and then the greater energy. And I was like, oh my God, I'm crumbling. Like midway through in Texas, I was like, I can barely finish this tour. I think my last tour stop, I remember Shiona, our friend who's my stylist, was like, what the fuck are you wearing? Like it was insane. Like I was like, my hair is out. I like literally have like something, it's like not working. I got it like a vintage store. I didn't have time to get it together because I'd like gotten the tour stop time mixed up and it was much further from my hotel than I thought. Like, and I like got to the last one and I was like, I am barely making it. And I remember being like, God, I just want to, like, I wish more than anything there was a flight late enough in San Francisco to get me home to Los Angeles tonight, because I just want to like get in my bed with my kids because this is so intense. And I would say that mantra. I'd be like the light's on for me. Like I would take a breath, and I wrote it in the book. I was like, if you feel far from home, whatever your kind of heart space home is, put your hand on your chest, take a breath, and say, we'll leave the light on for you. Like, and I remember thinking like, and it took a while, like even after the tour and, you know, then it was like the holidays and stuff, I remember being like, wow, it took me a while to even like come to life after the experience.
Also separate from what was going on in the world, this is your most intimate book.
Yes.
And so, you know, I do want to know from you what it is like just in general to have to, I think, obviously writing is so healing and it is so personal and private. And this is just what I respect so much about writers. You know, I am terrified to look back at my own words. And so writing it is one thing. And then by the time you write it to when it actually comes out, we change. We change every day. So even if it's only by a few months, and then, you know, forget that there was a complete world shift, just you as a person, how is that to go and write that and then go and have to actually talk about it?
You know, I think one of the best things about the writing,
talking about your intimate feeling, talking about your intimate.
I think one of the greatest perks of the writing process is, you know, there's the initial dump, and that's just really therapeutic. That's why like the first draft is so disgusting, because it's like, blah. And then the second draft is still kind of blah. Like, it's just like, you're just kind of getting it out. And then by the end of it, when you kind of come in as your own editor to be like, okay, how do I make this good? How do I make this something I want to read? You've become distant from who wrote it because you take time in between. So after you write something and if you love it or you've drafted it a few times and it's really great, and then, you know, you take a few weeks away, you take a month away, and then you're like, okay, let's go in here and make this something that, you know, for me, I always write for my friends. And I always write books that I feel would be helpful to me given like the pace of my life or the pace of the world or what I feel like I have time for or don't. You know, when I was writing Heart Talk, I remember sitting at a table, and this is almost 10 years ago, and being like, you know, who here is feels like they don't have time to read a book front to back? And like everyone raised their hand. And then I was like, who feels like when they start a new chapter, they look at the pages to see when the chapter ends, so that they can kind of understand how much time they have, or if they want to keep going or put it down later, or, you know, me too. Me too. And then I was like,
to know.
Yeah, you got to know.
Yeah.
Because then you just know, you know, like, okay, because I do try to stay away from my phone if I'm writing, but when you have kids, that is that's tough to come across. And so then I said, how many of you, if you see something you love in a book, you take a photo of it and send it to a friend?
Yeah.
Therein became the template of Heart Talk.
Yeah.
Because I was like, okay, I want a book that someone could pick up at any page and it reads well from front to back. I want something where someone doesn't have to feel hijacked out of the moment of reading to like count the chapters. So I intentionally didn't create chapters. Even in Remember Love, it was in sections. And I felt that I put it in 4 parts because it needed to like, I wanted to help people be like, if this is where you are, here's a landing spot. Like, so there's a part on heartbreak. If you are in heartbreak, grief, relational heartbreak, friendship heartbreak, land here. Like, if you feel like you're lost, there is a part of this book called Eventually We'll Get There. Be in it however you want to be in it. It's not chaptered, it's not titled, there's no list, there's no table of contents. And which is actually very annoying for me on tour, because I'm always like, where is that thing? And, you know, there's still this freedom to live in it how you want. But I remember with Heart Talk at the time, I was like, and I want it to be something that like is easy to visually share with your friend. And it's kind of crazy how if you intentionalize your books, they get used exactly like that. Yeah. Like, it's not just that it was like, oh, a focus on the format and the ton of technology of how the book would be used. But I remember being, you know, before published, being like, this is how I hope people will use it. This is where I hope it will go when we pick the size. I was like, I really hope it'll be in your purse. I really hope it will be and like
on your night table, just a, you know, one of those, which it is.
Yeah.
Don't you find it to be one of the biggest acts of love when people send you something, a piece of writing?
Yes.
I do.
Really do.
I find it's like, it is a way of saying, I see you.
And it's like, it's kind of cool when that happens, because you realize that love is like happening all the time in your subconscious about for the people you love. And so when you're reading a book and all of a sudden you're like, I sent this to you because it reminded me of you.
Yeah.
And there's a flip side of that, which is you're obsessed with somebody. So you're like constantly looking for them in the world. Because I've definitely done that when I had like a horrible ex-boyfriend that I like literally tortured me. And I'd be like, saw this thing, heard this song, like, and you're just desperate.
Yeah.
So when it's not that, I think it's a very loving, non-manipulative gesture.
Yes.
But when it's actually like you're, you realize that love is in abstract all the time.
Yeah.
And it kind of comes in through the ways in which you connect those you love to something right in front of you.
Absolutely.
That is about somebody else and another thing.
Yeah.
And
it has nothing to do with you. Just reading something and saying to them, I thought of you when I read this.
What's cool about writing books is that a lot of the times as you're writing, that writer has written it for someone they know.
Yeah.
And that kind of greater connective experience. I remember in Heart Talk, there's a poem that says, baby, you're the strongest flower that ever grew. Remember that when the weather changes. And the first time I ever wrote that was to someone I had just gotten off the phone with who was going through a horrible breakup, and they were just so depressed and couldn't get out of bed. And it was like day 4 I had talked to her, and I called her. I was like on vacation or something. I remember being like, God, I feel so bad for her. Like she's devastated. And I was painting at a little table, and I painted those words, and they ended up in my book, but they were for somebody who was like, how do you get off the floor when your heart's this broken?
Yes.
And to me, resilience, which is kind of interesting because it's how we opened with this, is this kind of constant remembering that we are so much more like a natural thing.
Yes.
So to me, when you're looking for resilience, like think about a river, think about a flower, think about a plant, go on a walk, plant your feet in something, because like these like hundreds and thousands year old trees that live and nourish each other and have these crazy roots and branches, or like, you know, these incredible oak trees that line the streets of New Orleans that get knocked down by hurricanes and grow in some way, or somebody comes and breaks a limb off or whatever it is, or tries to pave concrete over it and the roots kind of break the concrete. I mean, none of these things are worried about if they make it or not.
Yeah.
they're like, I'm on this planet and this is what I do.
I'm here.
Things break down, things rebuild. That is our flow. That is our selfness.
Yes.
And whenever someone's struggling, I'm always like, okay, plant something in your yard.
Yep.
Get a pod and put something in it and watch something grow. Mm-hmm. Like watch something turn from like the kind of nothingness of a seed, and without worry, without fatigue, without wondering if it, makes it or doesn't, this seed is going to reach for light, reach for the sun, and turn into something else. And Audre Lorde said that too. She always said, pain doesn't stay pain forever. Sadness doesn't stay sadness forever. It turns into something else. And that was like, that's in Sister Outsider too. It's like, when I read that, I was like, that's it. Like it doesn't cut off. Your heart doesn't, your heart, if it breaks, it doesn't just like, oh, and then one day you're over it. There is no getting over it. You do not get over hard stuff. You don't get over big losses. You literally allow for it to turn into something else.
Yes.
You allow for the loss, the grief to consistently change into other emotions, feelings, ways of thinking about the person, yourself, the life you live. You like the broken heart kind of comes together in a different shape and with different fragments and pieces and things. And that is actually getting through life. And I think that if you keep trying to feel that like, oh, you just don't feel something about it the next day. No, you're always going to feel something about it.
Well, nothing in this world, in this universe simply goes away. I mean, we're looking at stars that have their light no longer exists anymore. Yeah. We're for thousands of years, and we're still feeling that light and seeing that light now. Yeah. And that's so powerful to me, because when you think about the fabric of the universe, or your words, just throwing words out there and thinking that once they leave your mouth, they're out in the world and then they just disappear. Mm-hmm. That's just not the way that the world works. There is a fabric. Yeah. And so our words, even our thoughts, stay here. Yeah. They stay with us and they are floating around, and it's very important and powerful, our words and our thoughts, because they do sit with us and they become those seeds, and they stay with us, and we grow into whatever that is that we grow into.
It's also why I love the way that so many amazing authors, specifically Black authors, go into the world of like ghosts, and because there's such an acknowledgement that we are, whether you're Toni Morrison, or whether you're talking in sci-fi or whatever it is, where you're like, it's kind of Octavia Butler, like where you're like, there is this acknowledgement that this existence in and of itself, this kind of burning star that is like nurturing our life, and we have no idea what it's going to do, that fragility and that kind of magical experience of the way that matter is moving and doing, and how surreal it is to even be here. I love the way that's acknowledged in ghost stories, especially in Black literature, because it's something also about Blackness, especially Southern Blackness, is it's spooky.
Yeah.
Everyone's got, my whole family at least has like voodoo stories and ghost stories, and there was never I never really remember until I kind of maybe moved to a New York or California, and I know you have so many Southern roots too. It's like I never met people who didn't believe in ghosts until I kind of moved to those places, where they're just like looked at life in such a way of like, well, matter, it is or it isn't. I was like, no, everyone I know in New Orleans believes in ghosts and spirits and things. So much so that when I would read certain books, and there was a ghost, that never felt weird.
Anything. Yeah.
It never felt weird.
Like sci-fi.
Yeah. Like I was just like, oh, yeah. I never or if something strange was happening, or you'll have your certain, friends who don't have any of that in their background. If something kind of spooky does happen, and they have this I have friends who have in their later 40s been like, oh, I think I'm believing in the spiritual or ghosts and whatever for the first time. And I'm like, how did you just get there?
How did you just get there? Yeah.
And I think that that's really interesting because there's something so ancestral, and again, that's so deeply woven into Black community, that there's spirits and there's ghosts and and how often do you hear the word ancestors? Because there's this idea that we stay surrounded by this energy. And there's this mysticism, and that, I think, for me at least, as a writer who tries to kind of exist in this space of like kind of spiritual offering, that was what made it the easiest transition into, because so many of my, if you're writing about feelings, you're writing about the invisible.
Yep.
And I think for me, the kind of bridge to that was that, I didn't have parents that brought me to church, but I, lived above a voodoo shop on Decatur.
Right.
And so there was never a version of our lives that were absent of the spiritual in any way.
Yeah.
And I think or the kind of ghostly, magical, it was of course there's a witch somewhere or ghost somewhere, or you're believing in a higher spirit somewhere or whatever it is. And I think that this idea that we constantly are confronted with in community with invisible energy.
Yes.
Was always like, oh yeah, so I can write about the invisible. I can write about feelings, and I can write about how the invisible is so powerful. Like how because even if you're thinking about how you're working with your feelings to kind of alchemize a situation to make it healing for you rather than tragic for you, that is also invisible work.
Yes, it is.
Which I think is was really kind of a profound understanding for me later, to be like, yeah, like I think believing in ghosts helped me to write about feelings.
Wow. Yeah. Yes.
So, do you have a favorite ghost story or book with like a ghost in it?
With a ghost in it? I don't think so. I don't think so. It's not. I'm sure. Growing up in New Orleans, I'm sure you have just such a deeper experience with that. As far as like just that being a part of your everyday existence. I'm sure.
Someone said to me once, they were like, why there's so many ghosts in New Orleans? And I was like, why? And they're like, ghosts don't swim. And it was weird because like, what an odd idea.
Yes.
But it made sense. I was like, like when something is weird but feels right, it's like when you try a food combination, you're like, surely that's going to be fucking disgusting. Yes. And then you're like, weird, but okay. Like it was. And that was the day I was like, oh, yeah, that feels good.
I think I would ask, I always ask you about writing because I do see writing in my future one day. Mm-hmm. How is it writing in a time of isolation as opposed to when the world and life does not allow that in your life in that moment in time? You're a mom, you have a partner, you have a job, we are constantly being, at this point in 2024, we're constantly being pulled in 9 different directions at all times.
And we have so much community. I mean, not everyone, and I wish and pray for a community for every person in the world, because that is where true safety and healing is found. But I feel one of my greatest gratitudes is that communities that we have in our friends, but in that, to be in very valuable community is an investment from the self. Mm-hmm. And so those people who struggle to find community are also people who want to land in community, not invest in community.
Yeah.
And in it, they you don't realize that it is something that, it is a garden. You can't.
It is.
You can't just roll up, and you can't and expect to like pull a big carrot.
Yeah.
It just doesn't happen if you didn't kind of nurture the soil.
Well, and something I notice about us as moms is like we have to go and create it. We have to be.
Yeah.
We said it when we were coming here, mm-hmm. We were like, of course this is the most fun, and we're having the time. We landed, we went straight to oyster, we went to get oysters.
We do land and go straight to lunch.
Always.
And wine.
Oysters and wine, always. And we laugh and we have fun and, we do all of it, but nurturing this friendship is not just for fun. I mean, it's all fun.
Yeah, it's the
healing.
same labor as a romantic relationship.
Yes,
it's
it
labor.
is.
Like, and it's a labor of love, and that is such a gift to be able to have any labor of love in this life, however that manifests, whether it's in the creative arts or in community and relationship. But it's still labor. It's saying, I'm thinking of you. I want to plan something with you, and as I'm planning, I'm going to consider what you need, what I need, what would work, what wouldn't. You know, so many relationships fall apart because they're not thoughtful, or someone is intentionally creating blinders so that they can receive more than they're willing to give. And that's one of the biggest struggles to consistently confront in friendship.
Yeah.
I think that as far as the question about writing in isolation is that, you know, writing is isolating no matter what. And that's where I think most people struggle. You know, like Simon has, I never had this because I love alone time, and I do things so differently. I mean, you remember like my apartment in New York was like every wall was a different, like, kind of weird, moody color, and I had like dark red curtains, and you know, then I did my basement kind of like that in LA, where it's like I have these kind of like moody rooms, and I've got incense and lavender, and like, you know, I have my own kind of witchy kind of I like to kind of build the altar I create in. So for me, it's this really kind of like, like, how do I just like get in a vibe where I can like hear and feel and channel something or myself or whatever it is, or like hear the conversation I had with somebody where I felt like, God, that really did something or landed something for me. Mm-hmm. And so I think for me, I enjoy that when I grab the time, and you have to claim it. Like anything that is a gift to the self, no one gives that to you.
No one gives that to you.
Claim
You have
it.
to take it. Yeah.
And so,
just like the way we have to carve out this time to come here and say to our families, guys, you
got to stop calling us.
You got to stop calling us. We have to go, because while we're having the best time, this is important for our souls. It's going to make me a better mother. Yeah. It's going to make me a better person. Yeah. This is time that I am carving out to lean more into myself and be open to learning more, finding a new book today. Who knows what's going to happen?
And that's care. When you're looking for resilience, resilience is found in a cared for person. If you're looking for care, notice when you feel self-betrayal. Walk away from that. Walk towards something that waters you, gives to you. In all of that is you loving yourself.
Yes.
So when you're experiencing resilience, you are actually claiming, because again, no one will give you anything that is for you, that is yours within. It's only for you to kind of unearth within and be like, oh, I got this, it's in here.
Yeah.
But if you're waiting for anyone to say like, oh, here's the love you have, here's the resilience of spirit you need, here's that is not givable. That is only claimable through care, space, time that you take for yourself. And to know, I think, especially in Blackness, that it is your birthright, and it is kind of how we lead and get to freedom. That is also our birthright and truly belongs to us. You start to understand, okay, that's how I get up and get motivated towards hope, towards freedom. When I'm sitting in resilience and I know I'm in it, because I know I'm like freaking holding on and I gotta like reach for the light because I feel I'm covered in dirt. Mm-hmm. You know your why, and that's the big motivator. It's like, I do this because freedom belongs to me. Hope towards freedom belongs to me. In freedom is love. That love of self belongs to me. That love of my community belongs to me. And that's my advice for today.
Yeah. And, you know, in speaking and going back to talking about the fabric of the universe, even in times where that really feels like it's not an option, even saying to yourself, I want that.
Yeah.
I want this. That is alive within the space as well. And so it's important to say to yourself what you want and what you deserve in order to accept it when it does.
To let the invisible get there with you.
Away. That is the seed. Yeah.
Thank you, Nicole.
I love you.
Love you.
I love being in bookstores with you. You know it.
I know. I'm about to go ham.
No, I am too.